So there's only one episode left of Superman and Lois Season 4 before the show ends forever, and before this whole era of DCTV and CW shows and stuff like that really does come to a close, which is crazy. I didn't get to make any sort of video on episode 8. Honestly, I didn't feel like I had enough to say about it to cover really a whole video, so this video will probably be me discussing my thoughts on both episodes 8 and 9, though I'll probably be focusing more on episode 9. But to get my initial sort of thoughts on episode 9 out of the way, I was kind of surprised how unlike a penultimate episode this felt, especially considering in my last video, which was mostly focused on episode 7, I talked about how episode 7 really did a great job at like setting the stage for the final 3 episodes, and that episode 7 wrapped up a lot of stuff and sort of brought a lot of finality to its vibe and to its feeling and to its tone. And I was really excited to see how episode 8 and episode 9, episode 10 were going to deal with the huge shake up to the status quo and see what they did with all of that. And I was kind of surprised that while yeah, we deal with Clark's identity reveal and stuff like that in episodes 8 and 9, they feel a little more standard episodes than I would have liked, because episode 7 to me felt extremely brave in its storytelling direction and extremely interesting in its storytelling direction. I don't feel like episodes 8 and 9 lived up to the promise of the direction that we were going in story-wise. Maybe that's just me. Don't get me wrong, episodes 8 and 9 are extremely solid episodes in their own right, still very enjoyable, still full of great moments, but episode 7 felt like the big one. Episode 7 felt like that had the final season importance to it, and it was a big episode, and I don't think episodes 8 and 9 lived up to what episode 7 put on the table, at least personally. Now, episode 9, for example, was still really good, but I just felt like it was kind of lacking in the area of wrapping up the show or wrapping up characters or giving off this feeling that things are coming to a close, that things are coming to an end. The final 10 minutes especially of the episode are all about characters preparing to take on Lex Luthor and Doomsday, which is fair and expected, I guess, but I don't know, I did feel like Superman and Lois was going to have something more interesting and something more unique to say in its final episodes than, I guess, going towards a big fight sort of thing. Because when you think of episode 7, that episode's entire point was about the important character moments. It was all about Clark on a deeper level and him facing this conundrum of how important is the Clark Kent identity to Superman, to his secret, to all that sort of stuff. Like, that episode pretty much didn't focus on the villain aspects of the season at all and was completely about dealing with the real human character moments, and I was really looking forward to seeing how episodes 8 and 9 were going to be more of that, like that they were going to I was hoping that they were going to mostly be those sorts of character moments, especially episode 9 being the penultimate. I think to me the character moments are what makes Superman and Lois special. Like, that's when it's the strongest, is when it's dealing with all that sort of stuff, and never really when it's dealing with the fight scenes or the villains or everything that brings along. Like, that's what the show has to offer, in my opinion. And I'm surprised episode 9 didn't really lean into those strengths and decided to be more about the coming fight with Lex Luthor. But I mean, as well, it wasn't all this. There's a great scene where Clark goes to the fortress to discuss John and Jordan with Lara, who is his mother, and Lara starts talking about the final days on Krypton and what it felt like for her and Jor-El, and the moment where they had to send Clark away, or Kal away, I guess. I thought that whole scene was fantastic, because it just kind of hit me in that moment when I was watching it, that this is the first on-screen Superman since, like, Lois and Clark in the 90s. It doesn't really deal with Krypton heavily in terms of like the destruction of the planet and the final days of Krypton and stuff. We see the pod come to Earth in the montage at the beginning of Superman and Lois's pilot, but other than that, Superman and Lois as a show, I guess some Jor-El dialogue in season 1, but Superman and Lois as a show never really has dealt with the House of El and how it dealt with the final days of Krypton, which I guess is fair. Every other version of the character has kind of done that, so it's cool that Superman and Lois leans more into the Kent family stuff and the human stuff. But just when Lara was talking about this, it was kind of exciting, because it did feel like we were getting a slight insight into what that was like for this version of the character, which we hadn't seen before, so I enjoyed that. Speaking of the John and Jordan stuff, I was a fan of Clark going to them and being like, look, you guys need to use what I never had, like, and there's 2 of you, use that, because I never had that help. Like, work together, work like twins. Because I remember back in season 1, there was a huge theory that, and one I'm actually surprised the show never dealt with, because it felt like it was kind of an easy theory to go with, was that Jonathan and Jordan were going to be revealed as literally being stronger together. It's like you know, in the way Supergirl, they have Kara say that the House of El means El Mayara, stronger together. I thought they were going to lean into that here, where it was like because for the first 6 or so episodes of season 1, we only see Jordan use his powers when Jonathan is like right beside him or in super close proximity. And I remember a lot of people saying that the two characters are literally tied, that it's going to be revealed that Jonathan and Jordan are stronger together, where Jordan's powers only come out when Jonathan's there, and that if Jonathan was ever revealed to have powers, he was going to only get powers if Jordan was nearby. And that it would create a lot of these interesting storytelling potentials where maybe you got to split them up to protect them because their powers are hurting them or something, or villains are coming after them and the villain splits them up so they're not a threat, and then you get to have these epic moments where they finally come together and use the powers that they have now. I remember that being a huge theory in really early season 1. I'm kind of surprised the show never went with it, but it felt cool to see some of that here, where we're starting to see them team up a little bit and use their powers in tandem. And this definitely feels like something that would have been a huge focus of the show had the show gotten more seasons, where we would have seen a lot of this and seen what them teaming up and working together would really mean. It's a bummer we're never going to get that, but it's cool to get a little glimpse of it here. Another scene, or I guess scenes, that I was really, really into and excited by featured the return of Chad Coleman as Bruno Manheim. And I was really surprised to see him back, simply because I thought the show's budget kind of meant that any returning characters was pretty much impossible this season. Because I remember the writers mentioned that people like Lucy Lane or Tal Rowe were pretty much off the board just due to budgeting and scheduling. So I assume that kind of made pretty much any bigger characters from the show's past impossible to come back. But having Bruno here made perfect sense to the plot, and it worked really well due to his association with Lex in the past. And it actually is kind of crazy that despite Lex Luthor being so integral to everything about Bruno's story on the show, we have never seen the two characters in a scene together or seen the two characters interact. It not to get too off topic here, but it kind of reminds me of like Jon Cryer's Lex Luthor in the main Arrowverse, where the first scene in Supergirl of Jon Cryer's Lex Luthor is him in Metropolis. Like he's made a red sun take over the planet pretty much, and millions of people are dying, and he's doing it all so that Superman will be powerless and die. And it's like the very first scene of Jon Cryer's Lex Luthor is about how much he hates Superman and how much he can't wait to see this Superman fail and die and lose, because Superman's not the man of tomorrow, he is, and that sort of thing. And despite that, and despite Superman being such a huge part of that Jon Cryer's Lex Luthor backstory, we never actually see the two characters interact in the Arrowverse. They even share the same scenes in Crisis on Infinite Earths sometimes, but the two characters never actually talk. Like, it's always a case of, like, in the Smallville scene, Lex Luthor sends the two of them away just as he gets there, or, you know, Lois knocks Lex out before Clark is not under control of the Book of Destiny or something like that. Like, it's interesting how these things work out, where, like, characters can be huge and integral but never actually interact on these shows. And I think it's interesting, but it kind of, I guess it's unfortunate because we're never going to see the two characters interact now, that being Lex and Bruno, I mean. So I'm a little disappointed in that, especially because the two actors were on The Walking Dead and they're two of the strongest actors on this show. It would have been really cool to see them interact, but I liked this scene for a lot of reasons, and it's not just, you know, to hear more about Lex Luthor stuff, but it was like one of the first things he said or asked was saying to Lois, like, how are you doing? How is everything with the cancer? And that's just, you know, like a great little character moment for him. I'm planning on doing a Superman and Lois seasons ranking once season 4 finishes completely. So I'm looking forward to talking about season 3 for a bit there, because I rewatched it recently, and one of the things I really appreciated on the rewatch was how well written Bruno was. Like, both him and his wife Pia and their struggles with all of this, like the health problems and how that played into their motivations and stuff like that, and why they were doing what they were doing. It made them both extremely sympathetic characters, and that continues here, where it's like, yeah, Bruno's a bad guy, he's done some bad stuff, but he has moments like these where you're just like, it's hard not to support his character a little bit, and it's hard not to want to see more of him, and you love to watch him, because it's like this, he's probably the most sympathetic villain on the show, because even, I know Tal Rowe became essentially a sort of anti-hero good guy in season 2, but even him in season 1, like, his motivations were doing it where he was going to destroy Earth pretty much because he wanted a family. He was going to destroy humanity because he wanted a family. Like, Bruno Manheim was like genuinely trying to help people with cancer for a lot of season 3, even though he was doing shady stuff in the background, like him having the stuff in Hobbs Bay and stuff was just to help people the way that he wanted his wife to get the help. And I just think it's really cool that, you know, he's the one villain on the show that you're like, why is he in prison? Like, does he deserve this? It's cool, but I did love as well Lois going to him to find a way to put Lex away properly for good. I thought that was a good writing decision, because nothing about this scene felt like they found out they could get Chad Coleman back, so they had to write a scene around having him back. This felt like they wrote this into the script, and after writing it into the script, they were like, okay, we need to get the actor back, or this scene or this whole episode won't work. And I really like when episodes do that, because, you know, a lot of these shows, it feels like they looked up a list of people they could get for cameos, they found out they could get this guy for a cameo, and they then had to write an episode around that. This felt the opposite, where they needed the actor for this scene to work, or for this episode to work. Like it was a necessity, and that always makes the episode and the show so much stronger when that's the case. Speaking of Lex, we got a lot with him both in episodes 8 and episodes 9, and we saw him pretty much completely transform into like the comic book business look for the character now. And I feel like even the way he walks is different now. Like there was this scene in episode 9 where I was like, he has that calm method of walking that reminds me of like one of the animated Lex Luthors, like one of the ones from the animated shows or the animated films. Now, I've seen some complaints in certain places about the way that so far Lex has just seemed like someone who shouts and is muscly and is angry, and that he also doesn't really have much of a history with this version of Superman, and that besides his feud with Lois, there isn't a lot to him behind that. And I kind of agree with that to an extent. I think it was good to give Lois a lot of focus with this Lex Luthor, and I'm fine with that. I do think it's a bit weird that Lex is so focused on destroying her life when, like a lot of people, like I didn't think of this myself, a lot of other people online I've seen have come up with this, saying that Lex should be much more angry with his lawyers, or with the people who allowed the story to be published, or the people who sort of arrested him on false evidence, rather than Lois Lane, who just was given evidence and published it. You know? Like, and yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Why would Lois Lane be the one who's held accountable when she was just pushing a story she was given, and not that story that she strongly believed in, and not everyone else who were much more liable to have pushed along, you know, a lot of false evidence, stuff like that. Now maybe Lex has dealt with these lawyers and stuff in the background, maybe they're all dead, but I do agree with that, where it's like, once you start looking into the motivation a little bit, it's kind of, it's not as rock solid as it initially seems. And it's also, other than like a brief reference in the season 4 premiere about Clark fighting some of Lex's men, there doesn't seem to be a whole lot of history between Lex and Clark on this Earth, which that's a little unfortunate as well. I feel like they've been purposefully very ambiguous about, like, was Lex Luthor a big villain or a big part of this Superman's life before season 4? Like, before the show began, was Lex Luthor an important villain in his rogues gallery, or was he just some kind of guy who would sometimes send people with kryptonite weapons after him, sort of thing? You know, it's never really been overly made clear, and I feel like that is one of the few missteps of the show, is that we could have gotten flashbacks that showcase why there is at least history between Clark and Lex, and not just Lex and Lois. I think there being history between all 3 characters would make this a lot stronger. But I do think Michael Cudlitz deserves serious praise for his ability to play these 2 very different versions of Lex and make them both feel different and both feel entirely valid. Like, when I'm seeing this new version in certain scenes, it genuinely baffles me how this could be the same guy from up to episode 6. Like, he feels completely different. It's so good. There's not too much else I kind of want to talk about in relation to these episodes. Doomsday returning was expected for me. I've seen some people be surprised about it. I feel like his departure in episode 5 was so sudden that if he didn't return in any capacity, it would have felt like one of those things that the show just didn't have time or didn't have budget to revisit. Like, I think story-wise, it is necessary for that to come back and for that to be rewrapped in a little way. The new look is great. Easily one of the best live-action looks at Doomsday we've ever had. That's not really a high bar. I also love them delving a bit into Bizarro Superman's backstory in the episode, and maybe this was said in a line of dialogue and I missed it, but was the fact that he was in the mines, was that him trying to find his way home again? Like, was he trying to dig through to his Earth again? Because, you know, Bizarro Superman's mind is pretty much gone now. He probably doesn't remember a lot of the inverse stuff, the specifics, doesn't remember the fact that the worlds were separated or anything like that. So is he just remembering the fact that he came to this Earth from the mines and he's trying to dig his way back down there to get home to his Lois or whatever? Because that is so sad. And I've been forever saying the Bizarro Superman is the most tragic character on this show, and that just makes it even more so. Now, maybe I'm looking too much into that. Maybe that's not the case at all. Or maybe it was said very clearly in a line of dialogue and I completely missed it, because sometimes I do miss integral parts of shows by accident, so that's my bad. Now, I am surprised that Doomsday is back in a versus Superman capacity. I kind of thought his return was actually going to be against Lex, like it would be a team up with Superman, or even something related to Milton Fine and Brainiac. And to be fair, this could still be where it's going, that Lex ends up having to fight both Clark and Bizarro Superman and Doomsday. But the reason I'm surprised is that because I can't imagine whatever fight sequence they do next episode is going to match the fight sequence from the season 4 premiere. Because I think the season 4 premiere fight between Doomsday and Superman was fantastic. It's the best looking on-screen fight we've had between the characters in any live action medium. So I think it's surprising that they'd bring him back for a fight versus Superman when it's going to be pretty much impossible for them to top what they've already done. Why would you want to revisit it knowing that you've already done the best work you could do on it? The teaser for next week does mostly focus on Lex versus Clark, so I think no matter what, Doomsday is going to be taken out or stopped fairly quickly. It's also could possibly be a case that the teaser was done like way in advance, and that the final VFX for Doomsday they didn't have done in time, so they didn't put any of that in the teaser. But maybe Clark or Doomsday come to an understanding and Lex somehow kills Doomsday. And then the end with Clark seeming like he's going to die again was too much of a red herring in my opinion. I don't think that's the way that the story is going to play out at all. I do think it's looking very likely though that Milton Fine is a character Easter egg essentially. No Brainiac next episode. I would be very surprised if they did it. I'm conflicted though, because part of me 100% thinks that they shouldn't do Brainiac at this point. That it's far too late, that if they were going to do Brainiac, he should have been a character by episode 5 or 6, that, don't just do him if you only have time for him in the final. Like, that's going to feel rushed. It's going to feel like we've got too much to wrap up as is. But then the other part of me is like, they knew name dropping Milton Fine was going to get fans going, oh my god, they're doing Brainiac. Like, that's who the villain is this season. It's not just Lex and Doomsday, they're doing Brainiac. They 100% knew that was going to set fans off. Like, they knew everyone would be theorizing for weeks when Brainiac is going to show up and like what is going to be thing. And in my opinion, that's a bit deceptive of them to do that if they knew full well they weren't actually going to use the character. Like, I guess to compare it a bit to Amanda McCoy, she's the character that is on Lex's side or whatever. Now, she is in the comics, but it's her appearance in the comics is kind of like, I guess, Felicity Smoke from Arrow, where Felicity Smoke was a comic book character in the 80s, but it was like an obscure character that you wouldn't really think of in a role like this. And Amanda McCoy is similar, where she was an obscure LexCorp scientist that you don't really think of as an important character like this. In my opinion, Amanda in this show is clearly a stand-in for either Mercy Graves or Eve Tessmacher. Amanda feels like she's a stand-in or an amalgamation of both of these characters, and she's there for a lot of that sort of stuff. And the two characters, I don't know, I guess what I'm trying to say here is I feel like if they were going to create more or less an original character and put her into the shoes of iconic comic book characters for there, maybe they should have done the same and create a new character or use an obscure character instead of Milton Fine, because that name immediately makes everyone think of Brainiac. Now, in fairness, they love to draw from the late 80s, early 90s era of Superman comics. Milton Fine in that era wasn't super tied to Brainiac and was still kind of like started out as like a LexCorp worker or employee or tech guy. I guess that's a reference to that. But it's also, they love to draw, they know what they're doing. They've done it in the past where they've taken a villain, turned it on its head, and revealed it's a different villain. And I feel like, I don't know, I think you should have just created a new character rather than use Milton Fine, because everyone's immediately going to go Brainiac. That's just me though. Also want to shout out Tom Cavanagh returning to DCTV to play Gordon Godfrey. We knew Tom Cavanagh was going to be in the show for months and months now. Like, since they were filming the season, we've known this. Rest in peace to all those people who thought he was going to play Eobard Thawne, referencing his line from Crisis on Earth X. And rest in peace to all those people who thought that, I don't know why, but that he was going to be playing Bruce Wayne. That was a crazy guess, and that was never going to be true. But fair enough to anybody who thought that. I'm sorry that he was not Bruce Wayne. Anyway, Gordon was a good pick for him, and to be honest, I also don't care what anybody else says, but in my opinion, Gordon Godfrey of the Superman and Lois Earth is a Wells variant. I mean, just going off of the multiverse rules that the Arrowverse set up, I feel like he kind of has to technically be a Harrison Wells variant, even if he doesn't share the name, whether it was a change of birth thing, whether it was a long distant family member of Gordon Godfrey is a Wells or something like that, or even if there's no relation at all. I think technically he has to be a Harrison Wells variant, just going off of the rules established. That's going to be what I assume going forward. I'm working on a video discussing how I think the show is going to end. I was actually hoping to get it up last weekend, but didn't have time, so look for that this weekend. This video was also supposed to be up last night instead of today, because I promised myself I was going to stick to a video schedule, and I immediately didn't stick to it. But yeah, I mean, look, they were solid episodes. They were good episodes. That's 100% true, in my opinion. I do feel like episode 7 was a lot braver and a lot more interesting in its direction and in what they did than in these 2 episodes. And I'm kind of conflicted because the teaser for episode 9 is so focused on action and the fighting between Clark and Lex that I was really ready for a final episode that was kind of similar to like Arrow, in that it was all about character moments and a lot of closure, but we'll see. You can't usually judge a CW episode based off of its teaser, because they're actually usually really good at hiding things, like not giving a lot away. So I do need to give props there for that. But how did you feel about episodes 8 and 9 of Superman and Lois? How are you feeling going into the final? Are you excited? You emotional? Let me know. And if you enjoyed this video, please make sure to like, share, subscribe, and all of that. And I hope you have an amazing day.